Welcome to Inkhaven Presents Readings from the Archive, where I invite internet writers that I read and admire to share with us an essay that they love and hold dear to their hearts or that has greatly influenced them. They'll read it and we'll have a short discussion. My guest today is Jason Crawford. Jason is a leader in the progress movement. He has led the effort to turn it from an abstract notion into a concrete reality with conferences and educational programs and careers and such. His forthcoming book, The Techno-Humanist Manifesto, will be released by the MIT University Press. I know Jason from his over 200 Less Wrong posts, which I have read all of. Be it from the bicycle to bread to the threshing machine, he has turned everyday objects into items of civilizational importance. His posts have been reviewed every year on Less Wrong, typically in winning the annual review of some of the best posts of the many thousands each year. Yes, he writes at the Roots of Progress and many other venues. So anyway, thanks very much, Jason, for coming on today.
Thanks, Ben. You're too kind.
So what have you brought for us to read today?
So this is a piece by Rachel Laudan, who is a really excellent writer on food and cuisine. And it's a piece I read many years ago, before Progress Studies was a thing, before even my blog, The Roots of Progress, was a thing. So this piece was published in 2010. I don't remember when I read it, but probably the early 2010s. And it definitely made an impression on me. It's one I've come back to, multiple times and recommended to people many times over the years.
Yeah, and I think it's from one of her many books, but you originally found it on the internet.
Yeah, I found it somewhere on the internet. I think actually the version that I found and we'll read is a condensed version of the original, but still just, a really powerful piece.
Yeah. No, I really love the piece, and I think she's gone on to write, I think, one piece with Works in Progress.
At least one piece in Works in Progress about the tortillas and the grinding, how much work it is to grind corn or flour for the tortillas.
Yeah, I love that piece as well. Anyway, thanks so much, and I look forward to hearing it.
In Praise of Fast Food by Rachel Laudan from the book The Gastronomica Reader, August 5th, 2010. Modern, fast, processed food is a disaster. That, at least, is the message conveyed by newspapers and magazines, on television programs and in cookbooks. It is a mark of sophistication to bemoan the steel roller mill and supermarket bread while yearning for stone-ground flour and brick ovens, to seek out heirloom apples while despising modern tomatoes, to be hostile to agronomists who develop high-yielding crops, and to home economists who invent recipes for General Mills. My culinary style, like so many people's, was created by those who scorned industrialized food. Culinary Luddites, we could call them, after the 19th century English workers who abhorred the machines that were destroying their way of life. I learned to cook from the books of Elizabeth David, who urged us to sweep our cupboards, quote, clean forever of the cluttering debris of commercial sauce bottles and all synthetic aids to flavoring. Culinary Luddism has come to involve more than just taste, however. It has also presented itself as a moral and political crusade, and it is here that I begin to back off. The reason is not far to seek, because I am a historian. As a historian, I cannot accept the account of the past implied by this movement, the sunny, rural days of yore contrasted with the gray, industrial present. It gains credence not from scholarship, but from evocative dichotomies: fresh and natural versus processed and preserved, local versus global, slow versus fast, artisanal and traditional versus urban and industrial, healthful versus contaminated. History shows, I believe, that the Luddites have things back to front. That food should be fresh and natural has become an article of faith. It comes as something of a shock to realize that this is a latter-day creed. For our ancestors, natural was something quite nasty. Natural often tasted bad. Fresh meat was rank and tough. Fresh fruits inedibly sour. Fresh vegetables bitter. Natural was unreliable. Fresh milk soured. Eggs went rotten. Everywhere, seasons of plenty were followed by seasons of hunger. Natural was also usually indigestible. Grains, which supplied 50 to 90% of the calories in most societies, have to be threshed, ground, and cooked to make them edible. So, to make food tasty, safe, digestible, and healthy, our forebears bred, ground, soaked, leached, curdled, fermented, and cooked naturally occurring plants and animals until they were literally beaten into submission. They created sweet oranges and juicy apples and non-bitter legumes, happily abandoning their more natural but less tasty ancestors. They built granaries, dried their meat and their fruit, salted and smoked their fish, curdled and fermented their dairy products, and cheerfully used additives and preservatives, sugar, salt, oil, vinegar, lye, to make edible foodstuffs. Eating fresh, natural food was regarded with suspicion verging on horror. Only the uncivilized, the poor, and the starving resorted to it. When the ancient Greeks took it as a sign of bad times if people were driven to eat greens and root vegetables, they were rehearsing common wisdom. Happiness was not a verdant Garden of Eden abounding in fresh fruits, but a securely locked storehouse jammed with preserved, processed foods. As for slow food, it is easy to wax nostalgic about a time when families and friends met to relax over delicious food, and to forget that, far from being an invention of the late 20th century, fast food has been a mainstay of every society. Hunters tracking their prey, shepherds tending their flocks, soldiers on campaign, and farmers rushing to get in the harvest all needed food that could be eaten quickly and away from home. The Greeks roasted barley and ground it into a meal to eat straight or mixed with water, milk, or butter, as Tibetans still do, while the Aztecs ground roasted maize and mixed it with water, as Mexicans still do. What about the idea that the best food was country food, handmade by artisans? That food came from the country goes without saying. The presumed corollary, that country people ate better than city dwellers, does not. Few who worked the land were independent peasants, baking their own bread and salting down their own pig. Most were burdened with heavy taxes and rents paid in kind, that is, in food. Or worse, they were indentured, serfs, or slaves. They subsisted on what was left over, getting by on thin gruels and gritty flatbreads. The dishes we call ethnic, and assumed to be of peasant origin, were invented for the urban, or at least urbane, aristocrats who collected the surplus. This is as true of the lasagna of northern Italy as it is of the chicken korma of Mughal Delhi, the mushu pork of imperial China, and the pilafs, stuffed vegetables, and baklava of the great Ottoman palace in Istanbul. Cities have always enjoyed the best food, and have invariably been the focal points of culinary invention. Nor are most traditional foods very old. For every prized dish that goes back 2,000 years, a dozen have been invented in the last 200. The French baguette? A 20th century phenomenon, adapted nationwide only after World War II. Greek moussaka? Created in the early 20th century in an attempt to Frenchify Greek food. Tequila? Promoted as the national drink of Mexico during the 1930s by the Mexican film industry. These are indisputable facts of history, though if you point them out, you'll be met with stares of disbelief. Were old foods more healthful than ours? Inherent in this vague notion are several different claims, among them that foods were less dangerous, that diets were better balanced. Yet, while we fret about pesticides on apples and mercury in tuna, we should remember that ingesting food is and always has been dangerous. Many plants contain both toxins and carcinogens. Grilling and frying add more. Bread was likely to be stretched with chalk, pepper adulterated with the sweepings of warehouse floors, and sausage stuffed with all the horrors famously exposed by Upton Sinclair in The Jungle. By the standard measures of health and nutrition, life expectancy, and height, our ancestors were far worse off than we are. Much of the blame is due to diet, exacerbated by living conditions and infections that affect the body's ability to use food. No amount of nostalgia for the pastoral foods of the distant past can wish away the fact that our ancestors lived mean, short lives, constantly afflicted with diseases, many of which can be directly attributed to what they did and did not eat. Historical myths, though, can mislead as much by what they don't say as by what they do say, and nostalgia for the past typically glosses over the moral problems intrinsic to the labor of producing food. Most men were born to a life of labor in the fields, most women to a life of grinding, chopping, and cooking. Servitude, said my mother, as she prepared home-cooked breakfast, dinner, and tea for 8 to 10 people, 365 days a year. She was right. Churning butter and skinning and cleaning hairs, without the option of picking up the phone for a pizza if something goes wrong, is unremitting, unforgiving toil. Perhaps, though, my mother did not realize how much worse her lot might have been. She could at least buy our bread. In Mexico, at the same time, women without servants could expect to spend 5 hours a day kneeling at the grindstone, preparing the dough for the family's tortillas. In the first half of the 20th century, Italians embraced factory-made pasta and canned tomatoes. In the second half, Japanese women welcomed factory-made bread because they could sleep a little longer instead of getting up to make rice. As supermarkets appeared in Eastern Europe, people rejoiced at the convenience of ready-made foods. For all, culinary modernism has proved what was wanted: food that was processed, preservable, industrial, novel, and fast. The food of the elite at a price everyone could afford. Where modern food became available, people grew taller and stronger and lived longer. Men had choices other than hard agricultural labor. Women had choices other than kneeling at the metate 5 hours a day. So the sunlit past of the culinary Luddites never existed. So their ethos is based not on history, but on a fairy tale. So what? Certainly no one would deny that an industrialized food supply has its own problems. Perhaps we should eat more fresh, natural, local, artisanal, slow food. Does it matter if the history is not quite right? It matters quite a bit, I believe. If we do not understand that most people had no choice but to devote their lives to growing and cooking food, we are incapable of comprehending that modern food allows us unparalleled choices, not just of diet, but of what to do with our lives. If we urge the Mexican to stay at her metate, the farmer to stay at his olive press, the housewife to stay at her stove, all so that we may eat handmade tortillas, traditionally pressed olive oil, and home-cooked meals, we are assuming the mantle of the aristocrats of old. If we fail to understand how scant and monotonous most traditional diets were, we can misunderstand the, quote, ethnic foods we encounter in cookbooks, at restaurants, or on our travels. We can represent the peoples of the Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, India, or Mexico as pawns at the mercy of multinational corporations bent on selling trashy modern products, failing to appreciate that, like us, they enjoy a choice of goods in the market. A Mexican friend, suffering from one too many foreign visitors who chided her because she offered Italian food, complained, "Why can't we eat spaghetti too?" If we assume that good food maps neatly onto old, or slow, or homemade food, we miss the fact that lots of industrial foods are better. Certainly no one with a grindstone will ever produce chocolate as suave as that produced by conching in a machine for 72 hours. And let us not forget that the current popularity of Italian food owes much to two convenience foods that even purists love: factory pasta and canned tomatoes. Far from fleeing them, we should be clamoring for more high-quality industrial foods. If we romanticize the past, we may miss the fact that it is the modern, global, industrial economy, not the local resources of the wintry country around New York, Boston, or Chicago, that allows us to savor traditional, fresh, and natural foods. Fresh and natural loom so large because we can take for granted the processed staples: salt, flour, sugar, chocolate, oils, coffee, tea, produced by food corporations. Culinary Luddites are right, though, about two important things. We need to know how to prepare good food, and we need a culinary ethos. As far as good food goes, they've done us all a service by teaching us how to use the bounty delivered to us by, ironically, the global economy. Their ethos, though, is another matter. Were we able to turn back the clock, as they urge, most of us would be toiling all day in the fields or the kitchen. Many of us would be starving. Nostalgia is not what we need. What we need is an ethos that comes to terms with contemporary industrialized food, not one that dismisses it. An ethos that opens choices for everyone, not one that closes them for many, so that a few may enjoy their labor. And an ethos that does not prejudge, but decides case by case when natural is preferable to processed, fresh to preserved, old to new, slow to fast, artisanal to industrial. Such an ethos, and not a timorous Luddism, is what will impel us to create the matchless modern cuisines appropriate to our time.
Thanks so much. I really loved listening to that. It was a really great experience. Yeah. So, say a little more about where you were intellectually when you encountered this piece and how it influenced your intellectual development.
What I love about this piece is that it is, it's deeply historical, and I'm just struck reading it, how thoroughly Laudan knows the history, right? She gives so many examples from all around the world, across so many different kinds of cultures, and throughout all of history, right? So she's got this breadth and depth of this understanding of cuisine that's just very impressive.
Yeah.
And she tosses it out in a way that just really makes you feel like you're getting this big picture view. And yet at the same time, it's a very philosophical piece, right? Um, and so I think this is one of the pieces that sort of showed me how history and philosophy work together. That I tend to think that more philosophy would be better if it were done more historically, and more history would be better if it were done more philosophically. And
Just like all the fields to finally converge into the truth.
well, yeah, I don't know, those two at least, right? Um, and this was a piece that really kind of was a dramatic example of that for me because it came across, it was just so powerful and such a delight to read, and such a just like overturned so many common ideas too, right? There's so many things that she mentions that are just like the exact opposite of the truth, right? I mean, and I'll there's that line about a paradise. What was paradise? Well, it was like a storehouse jammed with preserved processed booze, right? That's just like a mind flip.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a position that I think my mother also would have imparted to me about natural food being better as a kid, and just she repeated. I just enjoyed every single example being like, well, it's not true in this case, and it's not true in this case, and maybe at some point you're going to maybe change your whole position. I also liked her turn of phrase. The Luddism normally is a very kind of powerful, riotous, angry thing. I liked her calling it a timorous Luddism.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I don't like the new stuff. Yeah, I liked a lot of her ways with words. Um, yeah, and every time I read about very concrete technological progress, this piece, also her piece about Mexican women who have to, grind flour for like 5 hours a day, I feel a very visceral sense of like how of great gratitude and kind of fortune of my life that I don't have to do these things. My guess is you maybe in your various many readings of technological progress have had that feeling a few times of seeing how much work it took to get very basic things in the past.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think, and it was perspectives like this that added up in my head over the years until in late 2016, early 2017, I was like, this progress idea seems really important, both historically and philosophically, and like I want to go another level deeper on it.
Yeah.
When I started the blog.
Yeah. And the blog was just initially research notes of your own.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, the whole thing actually, it started off as literally just a reading project, not even a writing project. It was literally just what books am I going to read on my nights and weekends for the foreseeable future.
yeah.
And I was like, maybe I'll read about the Industrial Revolution, and then I came across a piece by Joe Mokir. Actually, it was another one I could have, suggested and brought here today, called "Progress Isn't Natural." It was in the Atlantic, and it was an adaptation from his book, Culture of Growth, that had just come out, and that really hooked me. And I read his book, and then I was like, okay, this is going to be. I'm not just going to read about the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to read about progress. Progress is my new like intellectual hobby, or even that was too strong for how I was thinking of it at the time. I think it was more just like, this is what I'm going to read books about. I'm just going to read on this theme until I feel like I understand this, even if it takes me like 10 years.
And had you finished your startup at that time, or were you?
No, I was still in the middle of a tech startup. Yep. And so, you come home in the evening and you have dinner and like, you read a book.
Yeah.
Right. It's good to keep some like intellectual thread going, even when you're deep in a tech startup. So that was what all it was going to be at first, was reading books. Right. It's just like, what book am I going to read next? And then I don't know, a few months in, I got fascinated enough that I was like, hey, I'll just start a little blog and like but it was really just notes on my reading, right? And if you read the earliest posts, they're still up there. They're like a few hundred words each, and often they're just like one quote, and that I thought was notable, or like one open question that I have.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of Holden Karnofsky's advice, which is that reading is not just an activity where you read it and you're finished. He recommends having the goal of writing something, writing an opinion about that area, and changing it as you keep reading more and so on. And you were doing a similar thing of like, you weren't just like, well, I've read the book. You were like, I'm going to write down what I've learned from it, or the key insights, and so on.
Yeah, I think I have a natural tendency when I learn something interesting to want to like consolidate the story in my head. And I do that by retelling it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I retell it in writing. Sometimes I retell it to friends over dinner or whatever. Right. But I have this sort of urge to like almost keep shuffling around the ideas in my head until they're kind of in the most like compelling narrative.
Yeah, that seems healthy. That seems normal. Yeah, it was really interesting to read about her. It was on some it seemed like a kind of health and well-being kind of website, and so you might expect that she was not indeed a deep expert, but she studied geology at Bristol, and then the history and philosophy of science at University College London, and not got into food until she moved to Hawaii with her husband, and then got into cuisines there and wrote a book about an award-winning book about the cuisines there. But yeah, it really took a quite a sophisticated perspective to end up pushing back against such a broad view about food and the naturalness of it being good.
Yeah.
Do you know how she ended up working with Works in Progress for a piece?
I don't know actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a good one that she wrote there. And her blog, which was hosted on WordPress.com, has over 900 posts that she was doing since '07. Lots of really interesting things there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing it touched on a little bit was, industrialization can make a massive variety of things very cheap. And I think it feeds a bit. It reminded me a little bit of like the current discourse around AI slop, where like you can create a lot of it and it very easily, and so some of it can be very not good. And then people go, oh, well, I clearly identify it with the massive of not very good, modern produced foods, whilst not paying attention to all the ways in which there's the average has grown greatly, and the wealth of access has also grown greatly, and the ease of access has grown greatly. Which I think has happened many times over the course of the Industrial Revolution, that things have become very widely accessible to people, writing and so on. Blogging, perhaps, is another one where you might identify it with, anyone can join it? Well, it must identify it with the worst and most plentiful, low-quality stuff.
Well, and it's probably true that the average blog post out there is, more low quality than the average printed essay in the pre-internet era.
Yeah, certainly the median, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, but you just you get a much broader variety of things. You get, and not every essay has to be so great, right? Maybe somebody's blog is just their personal diary,
Yeah.
or their personal travelogue or something, right? And there's value in that, even if it's not as good as a piece in the New Yorker or something.
Yeah.
Right?
But
and then also you get this explosion of experimentation, and you get this, especially with information technologies when this happens, right? You get this sort of removal of the gatekeepers. And so now there's this chance for really amazing blogs to emerge.
Yeah. I think many people would see a lot of blog posts and they go, this is proof why you must have an editing process and a review process. And then you read Slaystar Codex and you go, he ain't reviewed any of this. He wrote most of it in one shot and then hit published and then edited after he published. And we wouldn't be able to get that through some of the standard review and editing processes.
Yeah, exactly. Not to mention, like, Scott would never presumably have written all of those things if the way to get things published was to go be a full-time writer.
No.
Right? Because he had a job.
He wanted to be a doctor.
Right.
And he achieved that. Yeah. So you were working at a startup that you had founded, and you were starting to read some of these things. What were you reading around that time? Is this one of the main essays you were reading? What were the kind of key things at the time or was it just so much of different things that you were reading that was influencing your development at the time?
Yeah, it was certainly a number of things over the years. I think throughout the years, every once in a while, I would encounter a thing that I found was really powerful, and I just started to notice at a certain point that the most powerful pieces that made a philosophical point were actually deeply and largely historical. And so this is an example, and I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what all the examples might have been, but
I remember your first Less Wrong post was about turning air into bread.
Yeah.
On another food related topic about how we developed these things. You've been reading.
Yeah, that's my one about the Haber-Bosch process. That was actually my summary of the book, The Alchemy of Air. It's a very good history of the Haber-Bosch process. Yeah, so by late 2016, when I started this, I think I'd really gotten interested in taking a more historical approach to things. And I was not always interested in history, by the way. In school, I hated history. It was like my least favorite subject. I tried not to take history classes if I could, and just and it was really in my 20s that I sort of turned around and started realizing history was super important.
Well, you always ask such good questions. You don't say, what year was the bike invented? Say, why wasn't it invented earlier? Yeah, a much more opinionated question.
But then, also in the mid 2010s, I think around 2015, I also encountered the rationalist community, and I started reading Slate Star Codex and some other things. And there's some pieces like some Scott's pieces raised my epistemic bar. Like I would just read this and be like, oh, this is what it is to like really get into a piece. And some of Scott's pieces were really compelling because he had obviously researched them deeply, right?
Yeah.
And they were very in the weeds.
Yes.
I mean, I read his, he did some piece around 2015-ish on like gun control.
Oh, yeah. One of his Much More Than You Wanted to Knows.
Yeah, probably, right? And it was like very deeply researched, and it was much more compelling than anything I would have imagined anybody writing about gun control.
I loved his marijuana Much More Than You Wanted to Know, which ends with a wonderful Fermi estimate about the effects of marijuana. And he is like, it comes down to, if you believe all the studies and all the numbers, the main effect size is the effect of the lowered IQ on the number of car crashes. And that will be like determining the number of deaths as a result of legalizing marijuana. And that is like the main effect size.
Wow.
But yeah, no, I read those, and I'm like, I guess you can know things if you really work on these things. Yeah, I remember you had a left wrong post about trying to talk about what are the epistemic standards for making claims in history.
Yeah.
That I really enjoyed.
And so I think, these things kind of combined in my head, to the point where late 2016, I just decided I wanted to go learn a lot more about progress.
Yeah.
Because I really did see it as core to some ideas that I thought were very important. Broadly speaking, Enlightenment ideas like reason, science, technology, business, capitalism, industry, liberty, economic freedom, free markets, individual rights, free speech, all these things, and I saw progress as both kind of the validation, the vindication of those ideas, because it's like the track record.
Yeah.
And also it was the reason why I cared about those ideas, because I felt like it was important to keep progress going in the future.
Yeah.
And so I was like, if progress is sort of so central to this whole story, I should just go learn a lot more about it.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think also your later essay on the concept of forgive me, I'm forgetting the phrase, industrial knowledge literacy.
Yes.
Your later essay on industrial literacy opens straight up with 2 examples from agriculture about pesticides and fertilizers and so on. Do you think Laudan's piece was one of the ones that sent you into the history of agricultural development?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if it was quite that direct.
Yeah.
I think this was a great example of, so when I read this piece by Laudan, I was already generally pro-technology, pro-industry, right? And so this piece resonated with me, I was philosophically inclined to believe it, right? But it gave me this sort of angle on thinking about, this and maybe other pieces like it. Gave me this angle on thinking about those topics. And I think if there were more industrial literacy in our society, then more people would not be surprised by this kind of essay, right?
What, if anything, did you notice differently rereading it this time than when you initially read it? Was there anything that stood out to you on that reading where you were like, oh yeah, I forgot this part was here, or this is a...
I was struck by just how broad it is. Again, the sort of breadth and depth of her knowledge. And there really is something about the tightness of the writing.
Yeah.
Also, right? It's very economical with words, without being sort of terse or, it's very easy to read. It just flows.
Yeah.
And there's so much. I just feel like it's like a very rich stream of content, right? Like so many, every sentence just like feeding content ideas into my head.
Yeah, no, I've been hearing people read a few last rank posts, and this was a little, it flowed a little more naturally. And so you read it then. Have you returned to it in the years since you initially read it?
I have. I'm sure I've read this piece more than once. Yeah. Because there are paragraphs and things that stick out at me. That line where she's just rattling off all of the verbs that we do to food, right? And it ends with it being, beaten into submission, right? Just this, it really drives home the, this notion that natural things are not just automatically good, right? Things don't just arrive from nature ready for us.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we have to process everything that nature gives us.
I love the ending sentence. Such an ethos, and not a timorous Luddism, is what will impel us to create the matchless modern cuisines appropriate to our time.
Yeah.
And I thought appropriate to our time and to our powers. We can create such great foods, and we have to choose to, and we can develop those. They're not simply nature does them to us at this level of like time or history or something like that.
Another thing I would say about this, and a thing that I like and maybe noticed on this reading was, she's not saying, hey, you should be happy with Twinkies, right?
No.
She's not saying, oh, the worst, sort of things that you associate with industrial food are actually good.
Yeah.
What she's saying is, no, actually, even by the standards of we want food to be tasty and healthy and right, all the sort of standards that we agree on, actually industrialized food can be better.
Yeah.
It can be better food. And then also, she just had this real view of what solving these problems does for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Right? That it gives us choices. And I'm realizing now that she grasped back in 2010 or probably much before, something that much later became a theme in some of my writing, which is that, material progress doesn't just give us material values, but by satisfying our material needs, it gives us the time and space to even achieve, even more meaningful values, like having time, deciding what we do with our lives.
Yeah, I think her writing about food is not simply, as you say, comparing a Twinkie to like a candy bar from, I don't know, whatever dessert you might have 200 years ago, but it's comparing the whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
How much work goes into getting food? How much work goes into getting a certain quality of food? Who can afford that food? And comparing that to the past, the entire, like, it is not just through a single variable, but for the whole perspective at the same time, which she does excellently.
Another thing that strikes me about this is, it's so much of it is against a kind of blind or fantasy romanticizing of the past and of quote unquote, natural quote unquote tradition. And she does this in many different ways, right? Not just, didn't you know we were all starving, back then?
Yeah.
Right? But like the this thing about how, oh, there are these foods that you think of as ethnic and traditional, and actually they're not what the peasants ate because they couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
They're probably what like the royalty ate or the aristocracy,
Yeah.
right? Or the rich at least. And there are all these foods. Okay, here are all these foods you think are traditional, and yet it turns out like they were invented maybe decades ago, right? There's another example, by the way, that wasn't in this piece, but it was like ciabatta bread was invented in like the 1980s or something, right? And you just think
Good job, 1980s.
we don't know, right? We you look at it, and you're like, oh, this must be some traditional Italian food that goes back to the 800s or whatever, and like, nope, it's very recent, and
it's still great. We love it.
Sure, yeah. Recently invented things can be good. It turns out. Everything you love at some point was invented and was new.
At some point, it was recently new.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, "Oh, what's this new ciabatta bread we're having to eat?"
Right.
Wonderful. I think I may as well just mention you come to Inkhaven for a day. I hope you've had a good time. Curious what it's been like interacting a little with the residents. You've only been here a little time, but curious what your experience has been like here so far.
Yeah, it's been good. I really like the idea of making people write every day.
Yeah.
And that gets a lot of people, I think, over a hump of a lot of different humps. It's just like, oh, I have to choose something good, and oh, I have to do the definitive version of it, and oh, it must be a deeply researched piece, and so all of that is good. Yeah, I did office hours today.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of people come by. Some of them came by with drafts, full drafts that I could read and give them feedback on. Some of them came with half-written drafts or just ideas for drafts, and we chatted about them. Some pieces I was just like, this is good, and I learned something from it, and I liked it. And some pieces I was like, I disagree with this entire thing. And all of them, we had a great conversation. So
yeah, it seemed lively. Anyway, I just want to say thanks so much for coming to Inkhaven. I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for reading this. I was delighted to get to read it. I'd never heard of Rachel before.
Certainly, this is fun to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, and let's end it there. Farewell. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to thank our sponsor for this episode, WordPress.com. As a teenager, many of the blogs I grew up reading were built using WordPress, such as Slaystar Codex, Don't Worry About the Vars, and Shtetl Optimized. The co-founder of WordPress, Matt Mullenweg, went on to build WordPress.com, a hosting service that supports bloggers. It provides an interface that allows you to design your website and to use the near infinite family of libraries and plugins that have been built for WordPress. If you're someone who cares to be able to design your own blog for your ideas, for your writing, and for your own aesthetic, then by far one of the best options on the internet today is WordPress.com.